Hi, it's Chip, and we're gonna look at making a basic map. And with basic, I mean that not necessarily we're gonna skip parts, but by the techniques that we're using, we're just gonna be using the editor in this case. And the editor I'm talking about is this editor made by Ozonex. You can find it on GitHub. I'll make sure I'll include the link, and you can download the 0.703 alpha right here, and then this is the .zip that you need with the executable in it. And once you have that ready, you click on it and you find that you got this little menu. You got File, New Map, and here we can start our mapping journey with this little Skyrim customization window. The first thing is the name. What I usually like to do is look through Google Maps, find a name that looks interesting. There we go, Kadulen. Actually, let's go for Poepershoek. I like that. That's a great place. All right. And description usually adds a bit of lore to the map. Now at this point, we don't even know what the map's going to be. So let's skip that. And then we have the width and the height of the map. 5 kilometers is pretty small, 10 is like open palms, 20 C10s. Note that the amount of time that you need to spend on the map is multiplied by 4 every time you go a step down. So if you'd spend 20 hours on a 5 kilometer map, then you'd spend likely between 60 to 80 hours on a 10 kilometer. And you'd spend similarly to 100 to 200 hours on a 20 kilometer. So by all means, start a 5 kilometer map. And we're gonna, when we discuss more advanced topics, we're gonna be learning about techniques to help reduce that complexity curve we just described with the width and height. But for now, today is not today. So let's create a new map. First things first, it's important to understand where this map is being made. So we have 2 locations. On one end, we have the location in My Documents, My Games, Gas Powered Games, Screen Commander First Lines Maps. And this is where we can find the map right there. And on the other hand, we have this location here, where we go to C, Program Data, FAF Forever. Note that Program Data is a hidden folder. If you can't find that, just type it in here. There you go. And then FAF Forever. There we go. User, My Games, Gas Powered Games, Maps. And this is where the vault usually stores the maps. If you set up the right, go to the client, you go here. And oops, not the data folder. Go to settings. Then this place is usually set to FAF Forever instead of the My Documents version. So kind of take that into account when you want to test the map. This is where the game, or this specifically is where the game will look for maps. But your editor may not initially save it there. So let's fix that. Let's close our editor, save it, close it, and let's move it to the place where this location here is. And that can be the same location, but for me and for a lot of other people, it's not going to be the same location. Let's find that difficult, and then let's paste it in here. All right. Then I'm going to open up the map editor again. And I'm going to go to Open, not Open Recent, because this one is still looking at the old place. I'm going to go to Open Bin, in my case, where I stored the map. And there we have it. All right. So now we have a map, and that's one of the first issues that people usually end up having. I'd like to think that making a map is a very waterfall-like approach. So you start at one place and then you go down, and then at some point you're done. That's not entirely the case. It's very iterative, which means we cannot touch everything all the time, and by doing so we create something that's coherent. But the focus on this video is primarily going to be about how to deal with the terrain. So we're just going to be creating a very basic terrain that we think is okay to work with, and then in the next videos we're going to be talking about how we can populate that terrain with props, markers in such a way that it is interesting for the player to play the map. But for now, let's talk about terrain. And before we talk about that though, we got to talk about the camera movement. And if you want to translate or move the camera, you hold the middle mouse button. And if you want to rotate the camera, you hold spacebar. And then we have the usual Supreme Commander zoom, where it zooms into your mouse location. So that's pretty nice. The only moment where it doesn't really do that is when you zoom out. But that's fine. It is roughly the same. So again, middle mouse button to move, spacebar to rotate, and then we've got the half of the Supreme Commander zoom. Then here at the top we have essentially all the tabs and properties of the editor. The map, which is the scenario, which is the name and the description, and the type. Usually version 56 is fine. Then we've got the armies, so if we like to add more or less armies, we do that here. And we got some areas. Then in the terrain tab, which is what we're going to be talking about today, we've got the Heightmap and all the brushes to tweak the Heightmap with. We've got some water properties, and we've got some terrain types. We won't be talking about the terrain types today. And then we have the textures, and the textures make your map look less like one gigantic ocean of sand. So that's always nice. And then we have lighting. And lighting is all the shader properties or the graphical properties that allows you to tweak the overall feel of your terrain. We have markers, which is the fabricator of the extractor points and the hydrocarbon points, and for AIs we've got the combat and defense points, etc. We have props, particularly this paint button, where here we can find our props and start painting them. We got decals. We're going to be spending a lot of time in this section, and this essentially allows us to make the map look better by placing all these little, just like these fellas, all these little textures on the map to make it look better. And then we have units, and this allows us to place racks and all that interesting stuff. But for today, particularly this video, we're going to be talking about the terrain tab. Now again, this is usually an iterative process, so even though we're approaching it like a waterfall method, it's not actually really valid. But let's talk about these options and about some hotkeys that are really easy to use. Just to reiterate real quickly, middle mouse button to translate, spacebar to rotate, and then you have the usual zoom in, zoom out. Here we have the size slider, and that makes the brush bigger or smaller. You can do the same thing by pressing B. We have and then moving your mouse, we have the strength slider, which determines how quickly the terrain gains or loses elevation when you click on it. So if we would have this, then it happens really, really fast. But if I would have this, then it happens really, really, really slow. And we can change that with, I thought it was S, but apparently I'm mistaken. I know that with S and then clicking the mouse button, that's an important one. So B, click the mouse button, change size. S, click the mouse button, change the slider. Then we have 4 different modes: standard, flatten, blur, and sharpen. Usually flatten and sharpen works really bad. You're going to want to use standard and blur. I'll talk about that in a bit. Then we have the target height, and the target height essentially tells the when to stop the elevation, right? So 256 is really, really high. Considering the terrain, when we hold Control click, we get the terrain height is at 16. Now we can set this height to, say, for example, 20. This is roughly the size of an ACU. And usually the best elevation difference, which is 4. And then we can change this target height by pressing Q to go 1 up and then A to go 1 down. And this is going to make it really easy to focus on working on the terrain and not be focused on the interface, right? Min and max height, that, they exist. And then we have the rotation, which doesn't really make a lot of sense for a circular brush, but the rotation kind of allows you to rotate the brush. Now there's no hotkey for this because this is done on the CPU side and it would look really laggy, but usually we don't really end up using this anyway, so that's fine. And that's pretty much about all the options here. Now we can kind of set the entire terrain height to 10. That's very destructive, so don't do it too often. We can add height in case we want to have more space. If we want to go down somewhere and we're running at 0, then we can add height to the entire map. We can export and import the height map. That's very useful if you want to use external tools. We won't talk about that in this video, but we will in the future. And then we can, I'm not really sure if this actually does anything. I actually never clicked on that, so let's see what happens. And the real question is, can you actually Ctrl Z this, and does it really take 1 to 2 minutes? But it appears that it is taking 1 to 2 minutes, and it's using quite a bit of CPU power. Well, one of those moments where you clicked on a button while making a tutorial video, and you really shouldn't have, because now we're watching at this climbing up slightly while some Bitcoin miner is using my CPU and my GPU. Okay. I am not entirely sure what we have here. But anyway, that's what Generate Heightmap does. We're just gonna set the terrain height to 10 again and start doing our own thing. So usually we work from a design in terms of a paint picture that kind of describes how the map looks like. But in this case, we don't have that, and the average person that's going to make a map won't have that either. So let's start with something else. We're just going to start drawing. But before we do that, we're going to look at the symmetry settings. And you don't want to use none, because none means that if you would, there's no symmetry, right? Center by angle means that there's this point in the center, and we kind of move along that point to get that symmetry going. And then we've got this X symmetry, which kind of describes as you would expect it to. Z, similarly, other axis. X plus Z, very confusing, but that means that it's mirrored like this. And then we've got diagonal. And pro tip, never use diagonal. And for the sake of Y, we're going to be using diagonal. But you should definitely use center by angle. And we'll find out why that is in a bit. Anyway, we're going to go for diagonal top left, bottom right. So that means that it's centered like this. And again, we'll be talking later about why you shouldn't be using this in future videos. Just use center by angle for your own sanity. So that's the symmetry setting. So let's start making this map. Yeah, so this is the difficult part. Let's just start doing stuff. Terrain is 10, so I want to have an elevation here. There we go. All looking good. Let's remove the yeah. All right, and it doesn't have to look super realistic at this point. We just kind of want to understand how the maps flow, or the flow of the map is going to be like. So then here maybe we would like to go lower a bit. Something like that. And then maybe here there's some water. Because, you know, got to do the water. And then here we want to go up slightly. And note that I'm using the hotkeys. So Control to get the terrain height, and then Q and A to move it up. And it's going to take a bit of getting used to, but once you do, you'll appreciate it a lot. Yep. Control again. Lower this a bit more. And then I think this would be a spawn location, and then the player can go that way, this way, or up here into this place. Let's make that place slightly more interesting. It's going to be a little plateau there. And I think it would be pretty cool if we would add this little area here that we're going to flatten. We're going to blur out here. And then maybe here at the back, let's maybe make another little ledge, though. It's going to be more like a, there we go. All right. Starting to look like something. Let's add in the water. Poof, everything is in the water. Perfect, that's exactly what we wanted. Elevation is the height similar to the terrain. So we kind of wanted the water to start here, right? So if you hold Control, this is 8, 6, 4. So then the water would be at like 7. There we go. The depth doesn't really do anything. You kind of want to toy with the abyss here. Just make sure that these are always equal. So there we have some water. Would be interesting if we would have some, if we would allow hover units to cross this water pond here, similar to command units and stuff like that. Got this elevated place here. Let's create another small little elevated place right there. And let's create another lower place here at the back somewhere. Note that doesn't really add any gameplay mechanics, but we're trying to make the map look good here. All right, and then our markers, let's remove them first. Let's place new blank ones. Make sure that you have the layer set to all. Otherwise, even when you click, it's not going to show anything. So make sure you set it to all. And you can only select markers when you're in this markers tab inside the markers tab. And we're going to rename this one to Army 01, which has to match the army name right there. So currently it doesn't match it. And now if we name this to Army 1, you can see that it's now considered a spawn marker. And if you go here, we can see that the army marker is found. Same thing here. This is going to be Army 2. All right. And now note that they are linked, right? So if I move this one slightly down, then that one moves slightly down too. So that is a pretty good start for a layout of a map. I have no idea if this is going to be fun to play or not. We're just going to have to find out if that's the case. But by all means, let's start actually adding in some ramps. And we can do that by going back to terrain, Heightmap, and then use the blur tool we were talking about. And blurring works kind of like what you expect it to work. We increase the strength using S and then clicking. We increase the the brush size slightly. And we can kind of blur these areas here into a ramp, right? That looks good. And we want to do the same thing here. Blurring these little bits here into a ramp. And maybe something here at the back. I don't think it's ever going to get used, but you know, you gotta give the feeling that the map doesn't stop here somehow. More blurring. More blurring. There we go. And then the idea is here that they can get up here again. But not so wide, only there. And we wanted this to be traversable. Now, to find out if something is traversable, we can go Tools, Slope, which is Ctrl-G for short. And this turns the map into this blue, red, yellow representation, where the darker green means this is perfectly flat for buildable structures. The light green means it's starting to get nasty for structures. The yellow means you don't want to build structures here. And the red means don't walk over me, please. So now this is not really friendly to hover units. So let's fix that. Let's fix this entire area here. And then create a large. There we go. And we're just blurring here. I'm not changing the settings. We're just making the terrain look more friendly. In general, this is really sharp. So let's reduce the strength of the blur slightly, right? Using S and then moving my mouse. Let's reduce it and just blur this out here too. But we want to make sure that it's still not pathable, right? It should still be red. And here we want to make sure that it's pathable, so make sure that there's no red there. And that looks good. Again, sharp bits, we don't like that. Sharp bits, go away. There we go. Let's continue our blurring of slopes. There we go. More slope blurring. Let's make this one here slightly bigger. Let's make this one here more coherent. Alright, so currently this is pathable. We don't want that to be pathable. So go back to standard, make it very small, hit Control, click, and then a bit less strength, please. And then here we can make this less friendly to path, and then we blur it slightly to remove the nasty edges. There we go. So now it's all red. That's good. That's a nasty little place there. That's a nasty one. So let's get rid of it. That's all good. We don't want this to be pathable. Yep. All right, starting to look like something. And then we have this larger area here. So let's, larger area requires larger brush. And let's increase strength. There we go. And then here, same thing. And then here at the center, we wanted this large. All right. That's looking pretty good. And now, because of the Symmetry settings here at the top, everything we did here applied on the other side of the map too. Right? So that's pretty much everything there is about the terrain. And everything that you do beyond this point is going to require you to just get used to the tools, get used to the hotkeys. Please get used to the hotkeys. Don't go over here every time. Learn yourself the hotkeys. And work like that. Now, a couple of pitfalls that people like to do, but they're really bad, is that they do something like this. With standard. Whoops. That they do something like this. Why is it clicking like that? Oh, I set the max height to something ridiculous. They add this really small little noise to the terrain, thinking that that looks good. I suppose it has some aesthetical value to it. But the problem now is that if you're trying to build a factory here, the terrain is going to deform a lot, and it's going to be horrible for playability. So don't do that. Usually anything that you want people to be building at should be dark green. You really don't want any strange hills, etc. at those locations. So don't try and do that. Just keep stuff flat. We'll find out when we work with decals how we can make the stuff more interesting even though it's flat. And that's by cheating the lighting. That's how we roll. When we make maps, we cheat. Don't ban us. Right? But that's how that's one of the pitfalls. Another pitfall, check your slopes. Make sure that there are no little areas that are secretly pathable or people are going to be really annoyed. It's like in Cetans. Also remove these nasty little ones. They don't really add anything except create pathing issues. So go to blur, make that smaller, go to the standard one. Yeah, almost there. There we go, that's better. Right, this doesn't really matter because it's entirely, nobody can reach this place. Maybe a dropship can, not at that location. And that looks fine. This actually is kind of interesting. I think they can build a PD here, covering the water. Nice side effect of our random terrain deformation. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just gonna match what you're seeing lighting-wise with the terrain. And then toy around with that, see what you can end up with. Now this is by all means not a perfect map. We're going to be talking about in future videos about what makes a map interesting. Particularly that's going to be the next video because then we'll be placing the some of the props, some of the racks, some of the markers that are used for extractors. And we're going to try and explain to you, oh actually see I noticed I forgot this place. How dare I? See, that's why you should always look over your map. Actually, should that be so smoothy? It should be smooth, but not that smooth. Yeah, that's better. We'll fix that. But next video, we're going to be talking about props, resource markers, and about how you can think in terms of how you can reward the player for certain gameplay with your props and with your resource markers to really tune the game to your players. So let's talk about that in the next video.